Welcome CSE 121 W1 for Spring 2023. We're going to be watching a video from Spring 2020, but we're going to be doing the same exercise and everything should be the same. And it's exercise 21, QB Text. And I just wanted to go over the beginning part of it since that may be a little bit different. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to Coursework, Unit 9 for 2023, and find the Replit link and click on it. And this is one that I'm sharing with you that you're going to fork. So when you click on the link, it should open up in your account and allow you to fork it. And after hitting the fork button, you should put your initials here. I'll just put mine here and then fork it. And then it should be in your account. And you won't see any Python code when it first opens. We're going to be putting code in there, but we are going to be reading and writing from this file, which should be in there, which is qbdata.txt. It's a text file. We're going to be reading and writing from it and going through some of the data inside of there. And we'll be using W3 Schools to go through some of that as well to help us a little bit with that. But I just wanted to go over the beginning part because forking it's a little bit different than it was in the past. And also when you turn it in, you're going to copy your URL up here like we've been doing. But if anything else looks different, just be aware it is an older video. But everything should be the same. So coming up will be from 2020. This is QB Text. And we just finished up with the baseball one. So this one is a football one. And we're going to be working with text, and we're actually going to be working with files. We're going to be opening files and reading files and actually creating files and writing to them. A couple things just to point out before we get started here. Over here on this side were files, and usually I put instructions over here. We're going to have a file called qbdata.txt. This is going to be a text file, and it's going to have a bunch of quarterbacks. Now, I'm not sure what year this is from. This isn't very current. And we're going to use this file, and it's almost like an Excel type file, but it's a text file, and it's tabular, so there's tabs in between all these things, and there's carriage returns at the end. So that's the way it's set up, but it's a text file, so it's easy to read and easy to write to. And you could look at this and then go back to your main py file. That's where we're actually going to do our Python code here. So that's what we're going to be working on, and we don't really need this open yet. But when we finish, we're actually going to write a new text file in here. We're going to take data from this, almost copy it, and write it to a file with code. We're not just going to copy and paste it. We're actually going to create a new file. So that's what we're going to be doing. And just to get some more background on here, even though I'm going to be kind of taking you through this a little bit, two places to check out is W3 Schools under Python. There's an area, if you scroll down on the left side, called File Handling that has, it's just a small section that has about reading files and writing files, and it's very simple stuff in the beginning. They don't go really deep into it, but at least you get to see the syntax of how they do stuff. You can see right here, you make a variable that opens a file, and you use an R if you're going to write to that file. Even in the beginning here, they even talk about file handling. We use an R to read, an A to append, a W to write, and an X to create. So we're going to be using the R and the W, at least right now, and we're not going to be doing anything with these. So once you go to start reading files, they're going to look something like this. And we even have another method where we use this with statement that's almost sort of like a loop. It'll act like a loop, and we might do that more and more as we go through there. So I'll show you both methods. Another place to check out is also the How to Think Like a Computer Scientist Interactive Edition. If you go to chapter 11, there's a whole chapter on working with data files if you go through here. And this is actually where I got the idea for this. This is actually where I got the text of these quarterbacks. I pulled it right from here, so you could look through here too. And even before we get started, if you want to look through this a little bit, it won't always make a whole lot of sense. Maybe me going through it will help a little bit because you'll see like loops in here and you're not going to be sure of what's going on. So I'll try to explain that a little bit better as we go through it, because I've taken some time to really try to make a lot of mistakes and see why things are happening, because it's not always explained perfectly. So getting back to here, what we're going to do first is I'll just show you a couple ways we can open files. I'll just grab one from here and just copy it. And this is the way it typically starts off. Now, the way I've been doing it, I'm going to call my variable QB file. And then we're going to open our QB file. Now, we're not opening demo file. We're opening QB data. So this has to be exactly like it is over here. So you might want to check just to make sure you have it right. qbdata.txt. Now, it is in the same directory, so we don't have to worry about any folders or slashes or anything like that. If you were working on your hard drive, you'd have to be a little more wary of that. But right now, it's in the same directory, so we could just do that. And we're going to use R to write it. And you could use single quotes or double quotes. And actually, I think they look better with single quotes anyway, a little less going on there. So I'm just going to put single quotes back in here. And that's all you have to do to start. Now, a couple things just to point out here. We have this variable that represents opening up this file. And one of the things when you use this open method like this, which we're going to change, is you should put a close method. So you should, at the end of this, you're supposed to put not that anything will go wrong if you don't, but if you do qbfile.close, this should be at the end. That's meant to be the last line in whatever you do. So if you do that, although we're going to get rid of this because we're going to use a different method, but I just want to point that out if we use this method. And one thing just to point out of things you could do here, if I just said print QB file, and again, I'm just printing out the variable that would represent opening up that and reading it. If I just said print that, and I ran this, now I can close this. I don't need this open anymore. And I'm going to run it. And I get that, which doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of the file. Now, keep in mind that if we're printing QB file, it's really a variable that represents opening up a file. So it's not really text. So we can't just run basic string methods and stuff on this because it's not really a string, it's a file. So that's why we're going to have to do some conversions when we do this. Now, one of the things we could do, we could print out reading the file. So we could do something like this. We could go in here and say .read and read the file. And again, read is like a method of that. So that's what you remember when we use the dot thing. It's going to say qbfile.read, and we're in a print statement. So we have kind of the extra parentheses here at the end. Now, if we do that, now we're doing a read of that. Let's see what happens. Now we're getting this printed out. And again, sometimes if it's too short, it'll break it on different lines. So that's what it looks like. So if you just read it, there's your file. Now there's also, if you look through some of this stuff, when you read files here, they'll talk about read, they'll talk about read line, and they'll talk about read lines. And then they start talking about using a loop to go through it, and that's what we'll be doing. But let's just check these out and see what they do. Okay, that was read, and we saw what that did. Let's try read line and see what that does. Now, one thing you might want to do here is get in the habit of using this little tag thing with an X on and clearing it so that you can see what's starting, because it'll run the code right after what you did last time, and it may not be clear of what you're actually doing. So let me run that again. And you can see what read line is doing. It's reading one line, and that's all it's doing. And if you did something called read lines, let's see what that does. There's read lines, and let's run that. And there's read lines. And you can see what read lines is doing. It's doing the entire file, and it's showing me every character in there. Now, I took the spaces out and actually put in tabs, so it's a tabular file. So it could actually be relevant to use like in Excel or something like that, or in a database. So there's no spaces in there. They're all tabs. And there's also /ns, which are end of line characters or carriage returns. So in Word, they would all have tabs and there would be returns at the end. So that's what that is. So that doesn't really help us. But the read line, you might think, oh, well, maybe I could do a loop or something. Maybe I could do a for loop and say for I in, I guess I would do I in QB file. I could try that and say for I in QB file. And I'll make sure that I hit return there and make sure that's indented okay. And let's see what this does. And that actually goes through and it reads each line, and it puts an extra space in here because of the carriage return in there after it gets to the end of the line. So somehow it's throwing in an extra blank line in there, but that's okay. You wouldn't actually see that if you save this out as a text file. You wouldn't see that extra line in there, but it's outputting like that. So that's fine. It's doing that. And if you just wanted to do some of them, I guess you could do this. You could do in range, and if you just wanted to print out 10 of these or something, you know, just to get an idea, the top 10, if you wanted to do that, you could do that. So now that's just printing out 10. Now again, I'll clear that and run it again just so you can see what's happening. Now it's printing out 10. Now you'd have to count them up. But so those are just some basic things there. Nothing exciting yet. And well, not that anything's going to get that exciting, but that's what we're doing so far. So these are some methods that we could use. Read line, read lines, but you can see we're probably going to use read line the most. Now, what I'm going to do next is I mentioned there's another way to start this off where you don't need this close thing at the end. So I'm going to get rid of this, and we're going to try a different method. And it's almost the same. It's just saying with. Start off with with. It's almost like a while loop. You say with, and you can see it'll show up in blue. And I'll say with, and you might say, well, where's the variable? And then if you just say as, you could put the variable here. So it's just kind of working backwards a little bit. And because you're using this with statement, you have to use a colon. So it's almost like a loop. It's almost like a while loop. And that's why this is showing up in red, because all of this stuff here, we now have to hit tab or indent them so they move over. And everything you do from here on out should be indented. Nothing should go back to the margin. Everything within this width. So that's one way. And we're going to keep doing this because this is a little bit more of the accepted way to do this with this with open file like that. So a couple things we're going to do in here. We already did this QB file like that. And we are already able to print that out and print out these files. And again, if you need to clear it and then run it again and make sure you have enough space over here, so it's wide enough. Now, what we're going to do next is try to pull some information from here. And we're going to be doing that, but we can't just take parts of this because it'll be hard to know what's what in here. We're going to have to break it down in some way. And one way we could do that is actually create this thing into a list. So it can actually split it up and each element could be an index item in that list, just like we make a list of all kinds of things. So we're going to make a list of each line of these. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to keep doing it inside of here. And I'm just going to get rid of this right now. And I'm going to say for I in QB file. And what we're going to do is we're going to split it and we're going to create a new list. So I'll just call it QB list equals. So we'll set a variable. This will be a list. And we're going to create it right here. And we're just going to do something called I.split. And split splits up text. That's actually what it does. So that's why in here we're actually cycling through here. So if we tried to just split QB file, it wouldn't work. You might say, well, why do we have to loop through it? Why can't we just split QB file? We can't do that. Like if you tried to do this, like I'll just show this. If we went here and said, well, why don't we just do QB file dot split and split it all up? Well, if you try to do this, and I've tried all these things because that's my job to kind of go through and say, well, why doesn't that work? And if you hit run, you're going to get an error because again, you're splitting a file. You're not splitting actual text. Remember, split is a string method and it's meant to work on strings. QB file isn't a string, but if we go for I in QB file, now we've kind of created kind of a temporary string. We're kind of flowing through there and pulling out all kinds of words from there. And then when we splitting actually looks for, by default, looks for white space. So it's going to look for those tabs and it's going to create list items based on the white space, based on the tabs. So it's going to create this list based on that, except we're not using QB file here since we're cycling through it with this I. And sometimes they'll do this. Sometimes you'll see this. They'll say for line in there, and then you could call it line. Now, it doesn't matter if you use I or if you use line. I'm not sure which would work better for you, but use whatever one you want. But I'm going to leave it as I for now because we're used to doing that. So we're going to loop through this file of all this text, and it's a text file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a list. This will be a new list, and it'll be split. So let's just go here and print, and we could either print I or print the list. Let's just print the list right now and see what's happening here. And there's my list. So it's printing out this whole list and it's going through everything. So that's what it's doing right now. So it's making basically all these lists. It's making like 34 lists, I think, of all this stuff here. So it's making individual lists. It's looping through till it gets through the whole thing and it's printing a list. So that's what it does when it prints the list. And if you print I here, let's just see when it prints I what that'll do. And now that looks better because what it's doing now is it's actually printing each of the things. It's not printing the whole list one at a time and looping through and printing a bunch of lists, that's what it was doing before. Now it's actually printing the items of a list. So it's printing them out, and that looks a lot better. That's actually what we want. So it's kind of printing that out. And what we really want to do with this is we want to output some of these things here, not just everything. Now, one thing I just want to point out here that you might think, well, what if I want to print out just 10 of these? It's printing out all of them. What if I just want to print out 10? And you might think, oh, that's right, I have to do range and then put a number in there. So let me just try that. You might think, well, what if we just wanted to print out 10 of them instead of all of them? Would that work? Well, let's see. Let's clear this and let's run it. And we get an error. Why do you get an error? Int object has no attribute split. But actually, that's the answer. Int. Because remember, when we're using a loop and we're using in range, it's going through numbers. So it's saying a number dot split. It can't split up a number. It could only split up text. That's why when we just loop through it this way with QB file, it's using text to split up. So then now we can split it up. Now it'll split that in separate things and we could print them out. Okay, and what we're going to do next, and I think we'll do this as part 2, is actually print out just parts of this. We're going to use like an F string and just print out some parts of these, and we'll actually use the index numbers, like index 0, 1, 2, 3. We'll just print out a couple of these, and then from there we're going to print it out, and then we're going to make a separate output file. So we're going to do that in part 2.